Joining us now for Word Brief and the review of some of the headlines of today's newspapers from around the world is Adefemi Akinsanya. Good morning, Adefemi.
Good morning, Dr. Ruben. Good morning, Ayo. Look at us, we're matching. Look at that. And good morning to you, Rufai. Yes, it is purple.
Yes, we are.
It is purple, and we are matching.
Okay.
Let us start with the United States. Good morning. Let's start with the United States. And of course, it was the final night of the Republican National Convention. And at long last, Donald Trump took to the stage and finally spoke. This is his first appearance since that assassination attempt. And he started off on a very emotional tangent. You can see him there, the plaster still adorning his ears, but he goes off to the firefighter's uniform of the gentleman who lost his life while he was in the stands over the weekend, and he kissed the uniform as a sign of respect. And it's something that definitely built a huge emotional bond between President Trump and the watching audience there too. It was a very emotional start to his speech. I think many people are calling it a tale of two different speeches, because the very first moments of the speech, first 15 to 20 minutes, was very warm, emotional. He talked about the shooting, and he used very emotive language. He said, I'm not supposed to be here, to which the crowd responded with chants saying, yes, you are supposed to be here. So it talks a lot about the warmth that we have been seeing in the lead up to his appearance, all of these different voices talking about how Donald Trump, yes, he is a brash character, yes, he is a vocal politician, but he's also a sweet grandpa. And I do think that he started off his speech along those lines, very, very warm, very personable. But then for the lion's share of the rest of his speech, it didn't feel as organized, as unified as it had started off, I have to say. And he spoke for a very, very long time, which he usually does. I think this was the longest speech in the history of the Republican National Convention. And I don't think it was good and long. I don't think that it was lengthy and fantastic, because when you start off with the emotional language that he was using and the images that we're seeing there, I think that it built a level of expectation that he was going to maintain this throughout the duration of his speech. But then he's kind of descended into his usual tactics, referring to Nancy Pelosi as crazy, talking about the pandemic, referring to it as a China virus, using dog whistles that I'd imagine that we had moved beyond, that perhaps the expectation, especially since the weekend of Donald Trump, of his personality, I think the expectation had increased that perhaps he would leave these mudslinging tactics alone, but it didn't seem as if he did so. He also made reference to stolen elections, which again is another dog whistle to his base. So yeah, it started off really, really well. It did. I do think that he did the right thing by respecting the feelings of people the man who lost his life over the weekend. Also talked about immigration, different policies that his base wants to hear. But on the whole, I don't know that it did the job of cementing himself as perhaps the undisputed next president of the United States. Moving on then from one end of the political spectrum in the United States to the other, and again, there are more and more calls on Joe Biden to step down. It doesn't seem now that it's something that he is staunchly against. When we were discussing this yesterday, it did seem as though the rhetoric is more leaning towards an opening of possibilities. And if we are to look at these possibilities, at this point, it's still quite hypothetical. But should Joseph Biden choose to step down, the question is now, who is going to replace him? The most popular candidate in that context, you'd imagine, would be his own vice president. But because we're at the convention stage now, it's not something that is automatic. It's not as if he's stepping down as president and then the VP would step in and to become president. In this situation, if he were to step out of this race, then it's up to the Democratic delegation to vote for whom they want. So it's not so much a shoo-in for Kamala Harris should that happen. But it will be quite interesting to see whether or not these swayings is just chatter, or whether or not there is some legitimate prospect that Joseph Biden could actually step out of this race.
So a couple of things. Let me start with Joseph Robinette Biden.
Yes, Joseph Robinette Biden.
The scrappy kid from Scranton, like Obama likes to call him in Delaware. Truth has to be said, I think he's faced reality. Femi, for all of you that thought we had something against Biden, it was obvious we never had anything against Biden. And yesterday I was telling you, once the leader of the Democratic caucus in the House expressed his doubts, Hakeem Jeffries, I knew the game was up. Now the conversation with Biden is no longer, will he step in? Will he step down? It's about, oh, I'm receptive to the idea of somebody will replace me. I think what will now happen is the Democratic Party will converge, will meet the top guns, the likes of Obama, Pelosi, and all of that. They'll be able to pick somebody viable, and probably they'll do the deal. I don't know. There's a funny source that came out. I think Fox or something that was saying it could be as early as today or tomorrow. I don't know where that source is coming from. Anyway, I wouldn't listen to it. But when other Democratic big hitters like the likes of Schiff that held Trump accountable during the Trump impeachment trials, and Hakeem Jeffrey, leader of the caucus, because if Hakeem Jeffrey speaks, he probably speaks the mind of the Democratic caucus in the House of Reps. Secondly, I said something earlier on.
Right.
That the biggest losers in these elections are the American people. And it is obvious when a Trump presidency happens, Americans will see how much they have lost out.
Right.
I hear 90 minutes of rubbish, jati, all sorts of lies. Right. It got to a point yesterday, the fact checkers got tired.
Right.
You imagine the man said, he will end the war with a phone call. Can you imagine this?
Can you imagine?
I yield the floor.
Yes, well,
I thought people lie, but Trump's lie.
There were many high points or highlights, let me put it that way, of Trump's 93-minute speech, which he managed to break the record of his Republican acceptance speech, which had been the longest, in modern history, American modern history. Now, with regards to other highlights, first of all, Melania Trump was there yesterday for the first time. A number of speculations had been around the support that she had given or how muted her presence had been during his campaign trail. But she didn't say anything. In the past, she would have said something, but she didn't. So that was one. Number two, where the support that he got from other heavyweights or entertainers. His announcement was almost, heavyweight boxing, Kid Rock announcing, there being a rock band playing, and Hulk Hogan talking about his long friendship with him, saying that Trump was his mentor. To what extent that would sway people? Of course, they need this kind of endorsements to get some credibility and being liked by the people. Now, in terms of his speech, his actual speech, like you mentioned, he started like what had been projected after his near-death experience, that something might have changed in Trump. He might have triggered something, and it seemed that way when he started. He started a very emotive, like you mentioned, the choice of words, and of course, and perhaps the highlight of highlights was his kissing of Corey Competori's heart, saying that he was a true hero who died whilst trying to protect his family members when that shooting happened. But then he began to speak about Biden. He said he would only mention Biden's name once. But he referred to him a lot of times without actually mentioning the name and just saying that he was the worst. In fact, put together the 10 past presidents of the U.S., he was worse than all of them. And he seems to be 5 points ahead of him in polls, in mainstream polls. So let's see how the effect of perhaps this weekend's announcement, people are saying we should watch the next 72 hours for the Democrats' announcements in terms of which direction they'd be taking with regards to their flag bearer.
Okay, Donald Trump, on the final day of the Republican National Convention, surprisingly, was able to rally his base. This is a convicted felon, a known philanderer, a confirmed liar, and yet the MAGA fanatics are behind them. All of them, most of them wearing a bandaged ear, which has become another symbol, apart from the sneakers produced by CIC Ventures, which Ojineka Okwe was talking about yesterday. So what is it that these people see in Donald Trump? It's anti-immigration. That's number one. Number two, he's also, a right-winger, right-winger. And he says he will bring change to America. And then religion. And he started his speech yesterday by talking about religion. He said, I stand here, I'm not supposed to be here.
Yes.
They said, yes, you are. That was the response from the crowd. So he immediately started that speech by pointing to God. And the bulk of that speech was about the attempted assassination by a crook in Butler, town in Pennsylvania.
Yes.
And then he kissed the helmet. So again, Trump trying to iconize himself, trying to project himself as a man of confidence. One of the other things he talked about was immigration. Yes. The record of President Biden, although he refused, to mention his name as many times as he had done in the past. And then, of course, you had him abusing Nancy Pelosi.
Yes,
as you have pointed
crazy.
out.
That's not fair.
And you also had celebrity endorsements by Hulk Hogan, by Melania Trump showed up. His children were there. Eric Trump, I think, spoke yesterday. And there was also a television host, Tucker Carlson, also speaking. I hope a day will come when Adefemi Akinsoya will be asked to endorse a Nigerian president. But as far as that goes, he's doing well in the polls.
Sure.
He looks looks good on the polling results. But he has the J.D. Vance,
yes,
who is giving them anxiety in Europe. As for Donald Trump, as for Joe Biden, the major thing about Joe Biden is that President Obama yesterday expressed his own anxiety too. Other Democratic grandees, like Nancy Pelosi, also expressed pessimism. The story out there is that perhaps by Sunday, now that he's locked up in isolation in Delaware, that maybe he will change his mind. Having told us that if his doctors say his medical condition cannot carry him along, then he will change his mind. Well, but his spokesperson says no, he's not changing his mind. So there are two sides to the story.
Sure.
Kamala Harris, well, all the people they are considering, it will look untidy to jump Kamala Harris. They may not jump her at the end of the day because we're close to the Democratic Convention.
Sure.
Will she be able to win? Is
That's
America ready for a female president? These are some of the questions.
Although
she and her team, they've been going around preparing. But is America ready for a female successor to the presidency?
That is the question. Thank you, Dr. Rubin. Well, let's move on to news headlines across the globe. And we'll begin in Nigeria with This Day newspaper. This Day, along with many Nigerian papers, of course, focus on this deal being done between organised labour and the federal government over a minimum wage amount of now 70,000 naira. And essentially, that 70,000 minimum wage to be paid monthly is also to be negotiated every 3 years. So it'll be interesting to hear what the effect of that is, what people believe, how happy or unhappy they are with that amount, because as you are all aware, the initial asking amount went from 615,000 naira down to 250,000 naira, and they've now settled and agreed on 70,000 naira, which is clearly a huge step down from both of those figures. And when we look at our newspapers, a lot of them, as I said, look at this 70,000 naira amount. But what The Guardian, for example, do a great job of is comparing this amount, firstly, translating it into the dollar, so there's a greater understanding of context, so you can understand how much you're expecting these people to take home and how much you're expecting them to live on for a month, and contrast that to the price of goods in the market. So on the front page of The Guardian, they are comparing this new minimum wage amount to the cost of rice, 50 kgs of rice, and that is currently sitting at about 85,000 naira. So with this new minimum wage, firstly, it cannot service a 50 kg bag of rice, that's one. And two, with other people's outgoings, home costs, sorting out themselves, children, transport, all of these other issues means that a lot of Nigerians are struggling already to have a disposable income at the current amount. And I don't see that this 70,000 naira mark applying much difference to that. So those are the issues when we're looking at the minimum wage. So that's This Day and The Guardian. But also, if we take a look at the Daily Trust, for example, the Daily Trust talk about the reasons why Labour accepted that 70,000 naira amount. And among the reasons that they've listed is because they said it comes with a list of other perks that they believe will support Nigerians and help them in the long run. They also discuss about how they are happy with the fact that it will be negotiated again in every 3 years, or at least looked at for another 3 years, so that to organize labor is an example of good faith from the federal government, and one where this discussion over the amount will continue to take place. If we move on then to the Punch is looking at the House of Representatives and how on Thursday they've agreed to donate 50% of their salaries every month for 6 months to assist the federal government in addressing the economic situation in Nigeria. Those monies, they say, will go towards providing food and other needful issues in the country. And it's something that we have been seeing across the world, across the continent, with different politicians accepting pay cuts or donations, accepting to give donations out to the people in order to stave against this cost of living crisis. So that's what we're seeing on the Punch. And if we move to a slightly different story, the Nation also talk about the representatives and how they want to donate this just over £1 billion to pay for food for Nigerians and this 50% salary increase. But if we also take a look at the New Telegraph, they are looking at JAM cutoff marks and how universities have agreed for this cutoff mark to be at 140. So, I mean, it's no secret. I don't want to upset anybody, but I didn't sit a JAM, so I do want to find out from you all what you think about that. So I'll come to you for your thoughts on this 140 cutoff mark, what your thoughts are. But before
Standards
we do
are
that,
dead. That's my thoughts are.
We'll
Standards are dead.
we'll
So
get
kids
back to
can't
that.
even get
But let's
average
take a
200
look
in JAM again.
at our African papers. Daily Nation in Kenya, for example, they're looking at another prospect of once enemies now coming together and joining force in the aftermath of these anti-finance bill protests in Kenya. That is, of course, William Ruto and Raila Odinga. So this cover of the Daily Nation goes on to discuss about how they are proposing to join forces and speak with one unified voice in the aftermath of those protests in the country. Next, if we move on to Business Day South Africa, you've got the picture of Nigerian South African President Cyril Ramaphosa and him talking about how he believes cutting poverty is a priority for this government, for him as a president too. If you know, yesterday we were of course looking at Mandela Day, yesterday being his birthday, and how the general consensus is that if Nelson Mandela were alive today, he would not be happy with the state of politics, the state of the African National Congress, and the state of poverty across the country. So that is the Business Day. And then lastly, if we take a look at the Washington Post, no surprises there, have pictures of Donald Trump on stage, and they talk about how he has fired up a great old party that he has transformed. And essentially, we have been discussing that for the bulk of this week. Dr. Rubin, just yesterday you talked about how the GOP is no longer the GOP of before, and it's now Trump's party, one of unity, one of them throwing all of their weight behind this one candidate. And lastly, if we take a look at the Daily Express, they are once again looking at illegal migration, but perhaps a positive spin on that. Now there seems to be more collaboration between the United Kingdom and authorities in France. The headlines discussing border forcing, being able to intercept the illegal crossing of 13 migrants and returning them back to Calais. So that's just an example of the faith there.
Sad stuff. The standards have fallen. Olympus has fallen as regards education in Nigeria. For JAM standard now to be 140 cutoff mark, I'm sure there's going to be a day JAM cutoff mark is going to be 100. So out of 400, kids can't get half of 400 any longer as cutoff mark. Scary. The standards are falling, and there are people there. There are people that have education policy. I mean, we are renewing our hope in education.
All right, so two things. The minimum wage conversation, of course, very topical this morning. But what I would say is that my disappointment this morning is not that they finally arrived at a figure, it's the journey that organized labor took the Nigerian worker through, especially starting from 615,000, even giving us a computation of how they arrived at that figure, coming down to 500,000 and 250,000 naira, taking them through a strike action only for them to arrive at 70,000 naira. I hear their reasons, but I do think that it makes them lose credibility in terms of trust and the fact that they're actually speaking on behalf of the Nigerian people. That if they knew they were going to do this, if they knew that they had been having conversations like this, they shouldn't have taken or raised the hope of the Nigerian worker and then dropping it down so low at 70,000 naira.
Okay. You talked about JAM. I'm a member of the JAM High Power Committee. I've been there for more than 4 years, and I chair one of the committees. And what I know is that these decisions are arrived at, through a consultative process that includes all the universities. We meet on a regular basis to decide on what is possible for the various universities. And under Professor Isiaku Oluyede, in fact, standards have improved. What JAMB, under Professor Isiaku Oluyede, tries to do is to make sure it operates like UCAS.
Yes.
So one university, say some of the universities like Ilorin, like Ibadan, it's not as if 140 is flat. Those universities can say, oh, we can't take more than 250 for this course. We can't take lower than 200 for this course. You can have some other universities in the northern part of the country saying, okay, we'll put our benchmark at 140. And that's negotiated by stakeholders who meet. So it's not an arbitrary thing. And the system that Professor Oluyede operates works in such a way that if you apply to University A and you don't fit in there, JAMB, like UCAS, we offer you, okay, do you want to go to this university? So it's a competitive system that is in place.
You will choose the 5 universities that you want to apply to. And
it's the same thing in JAMB. You will put the universities in your form.
Sure.
And then, JAMB will help you to negotiate. So there is a highly competitive, more transparent, beyond the fact that JAMB is now even more profitable in terms of integrity, in terms of transparency. That's about that. I can spend the whole day talking about JAMB. It's not for me to report my committee report here. Now,
are you sure?
That will take a whole day. But let me talk about Rwanda quickly. There seems to have been a report from Rwanda that President Kagame has won again 99% of the votes.
Right.
In 2017, he won maybe 98%. The year before, he won 93. The election before, he won 93%. Now, there are people who have been praising him, saying he's a benevolent man, dictator. After all, he took Rwanda out. But he's a sit-tight dictator, which is a major concern, in Africa. So whatever President Kagame may have done, in housing, which is good. Rwanda looks like an organized society. But we would like to see a day when in Rwanda, it will be possible for another person to lead that country.